Has this ever happened to you, where your silence echoes louder than any scream, where your absence becomes the mirror to a man's deepest wound? Some women never scream. They don't plead. They don't warn. They simply walk away. But what haunts a man forever is not that she left. It's how she did it. She left like a poem too profound to be understood, like a shadow slipping away just before dawn, like a mirror turned toward him, revealing a reflection he had long denied. She didn't beg for closure. She didn't lower her light to be loved in pieces. She closed the door, not with vengeance, but with grace sharpened by pain. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And when a woman who has done her shadow work walks away, she becomes that very confrontation with fate. She is the reckoning, because she didn't just leave, she walked away without needing him to notice, without needing him to change, without needing revenge. That kind of woman becomes unforgettable, not because she tried to prove her worth, but because she stopped trying altogether. In the unconscious world of masculine ego, there is an unspoken expectation that she'll come back, that her emotions will bind her to the cycle, that she'll reach out at midnight, haunted by the same ghosts that he ignores. But when she doesn't, when her detachment is final, he feels it in the marrow. Because in truth, most men don't miss the woman. They miss the version of themselves they got to avoid when she was still there. When she leaves in silence, she removes the mirror. Now he must face himself. Unshielded, unreflected, unprotected. It's not her absence that breaks him. It's the absence of distraction from his own emotional bankruptcy. Some women think silence is weakness. But the woman who walks away without chaos, without asking for one last conversation, without posting cryptic messages or baiting attention, she is operating from another plane. A deeper power. A dark feminine energy that has nothing to prove. Her detachment is not apathy. It is clarity. It is witness. It is the maturity that says, "I see what you cannot give me, and I honor myself enough to stop pretending you ever could." And if she does this correctly, if she walks away with full presence, with dignity, with no performance, she doesn't become a memory. She becomes a lesson, a myth, a ghost that whispers to him in the quietest hours, "You lost the version of me that loved you despite your blindness." This is not a story of vindication. It is the blueprint of individuation. It is the soul peeling back illusion. It is a woman becoming whole. When a woman heals herself and no longer demands emotional scraps, the man who depended on her neediness to feel strong collapses. Not because she punished him, but because she no longer orbits his gravity. So if you must walk away, don't walk away in pieces. Don't explain the wound you bled for. Don't seek justice through his change. Walk like the woman who remembers who she is. Walk like the goddess who outgrew pretending. Walk in silence so pure that it echoes in his psyche for years to come. He may move on. He may forget your favorite song, your smile in the morning light, even your name. But he will never forget the feeling of losing a woman who walked away with nothing but her soul intact. The wound begins to fester not in her absence, but in the void her presence once filled. When a woman chooses self-possession over emotional dependence, she doesn't just leave a man, she forces him to meet his unhealed self, his unparented ego, his fractured inner boy who thought power came from being chased. You see, she wasn't just a lover. She was the silent architect of his false identity. Her forgiveness patched his recklessness. Her softness covered his emotional ignorance. Her presence made him feel whole, even when he wasn't. And now, with her gone, the mask falls, and the emptiness howls. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon as the activation of the shadow archetype. The man who once felt invincible now sees himself through a lens of brutal honesty. Not because someone criticized him, but because the woman who once protected his illusions now walks as a mirror of truth. When she doesn't reach out, he spirals. When she doesn't look back, he doubts his worth. When she glows in silence, he questions everything. And that's the wound that never heals. Because what he truly lost wasn't a woman's body. It was her trust. Her spiritual offering of loyalty, of sacred presence, of emotional labor he never acknowledged. A man will forget the one who shouted, accused, clung, but he will forever remember the one who smiled in stillness, folded her love like a letter unsent, and simply disappeared into the self. Some women are oceans, loud, dramatic, crashing. But the most dangerous women are still waters. She becomes the silence after the storm, the calm that unnerves, the quiet that haunts, the unanswered message, the unread note, the unreturned gaze. And when he lies awake at night, trying to fill the hollow she left behind, he realizes it was never about possession. It was about presence. And hers was sacred. This is the woman who no longer identifies with being not enough. She is no longer fueled by fixing broken people. She has learned that staying where she isn't valued is a form of self-abandonment. Now she speaks less, reacts less, explains nothing, because the more healed she becomes, the quieter she becomes. Not out of spite, but out of deep inner peace. Jung would call this individuation, the process of becoming whole within, no longer projecting unmet needs onto another, no longer shrinking to fit someone else's capacity to love. So when she walks away, not in bitterness but in balance, the man who once took her for granted is left with a haunting truth. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally started loving herself more. That kind of departure leaves no space for closure, no story to reframe, no war to win, only memory. And memory, when not sweetened by redemption, becomes a torment. A loop he cannot escape. It plays when he meets someone new but can't feel the same spark. It surfaces when he sees another woman wear confidence like a shield. It screams when silence reminds him of her absence. And worse, when he finally grows into the man she once needed, she's already gone. Because her walking away wasn't a tactic. It was truth. It was the final act of a woman who spent too long waiting to be chosen and finally chose herself. So if you do this when you walk away, if you leave without performance, without bitterness, without demand, you won't be the ex he gets over. You'll be the soul echo he hears every time he's alone. He begins to remember her in moments he least expects, not during chaos or noise, but in the stillness. In the quiet morning when the world hasn't quite woken, when the sunlight leaks through the curtains like a memory, she returns, not physically, but as a feeling, a haunting. This is the power of the woman who walks away without theatrics, without one last word, without needing to explain herself into understanding. Her silence is not passive. It's a storm that takes root in the places he refused to clean. It drips into his unconscious, reactivating every time he avoids depth in another woman. Because now he knows what it feels like to lose something real. When a woman leaves with grace, she becomes sacred, unreachable, beyond the realm of apology or closure. Jung knew that the psyche does not forget emotional truths. They live within us, buried in the unconscious, resurrected by reminders, triggered by symbols, shaped by archetypes. And the woman who once loved him deeply, the one who stayed quiet through his storms, who offered her soul as sanctuary while he mistook it for shelter, she becomes the symbol of what he didn't honor when he had the chance. And now she no longer needs him. That's the part that breaks him. Not that she left, but that she didn't look back. Men often believe they are forgotten by the women they mistreat. They think detachment is just a reaction. But true detachment isn't born from pain. It's born from evolution. It happens the moment she realizes she was never incomplete. That man who once basked in her softness now finds that same softness sharp. Every memory of her becomes a blade of awareness. She didn't slam the door, she left it open, but he can no longer enter. Because she no longer lives in the version of herself who waited, who explained, who hoped. That version of her has died. Now, she walks not as someone who needs validation, but as someone who validates herself. And it terrifies him. Because nothing is more confronting to the masculine ego than the woman who no longer craves his love. It renders him powerless. Not because she stripped it from him, but because he never had it to begin with. She had always been the one holding it all together, and when she stopped, it all collapsed. You see, the man who takes her for granted never really knows her. He only knows the version of her that tolerated his blindness. But the woman she becomes after walking away, he will never meet her again. And this becomes his greatest punishment. He will search for her in other faces. He will chase shadows that resemble her, but they will all fall short. Because none of them earned the right to witness the full unfolding of her healed soul. Carl Jung spoke often of the anima, the inner feminine within every man. And when she leaves, she doesn't just exit his life, she awakens that anima with fire. And if he does not integrate it, if he does not sit with the grief of her departure, it will haunt every future connection he tries to build. He may call it heartbreak. He may call it regret. But in truth, it's revelation. She showed him what love could have been if he had only shown up. If he had chosen healing instead of hiding, vulnerability instead of games, presence instead of power. But she is gone. And now there's only the silence, the echo of footsteps walking away, not in anger, not in pain, but in power. And that he will never recover from. There's a silence that speaks louder than rage, a silence that isn't empty, but full of boundaries, of realization, of transformation. And when she walks away in that silence, it tells a story no words ever could. This is not the silence of passive withdrawal. This is the silence of integration, of the feminine soul that has merged her shadow with her strength and no longer seeks permission to exist. Jung taught us that projection is the soul's way of recognizing its disowned parts. And when she reflected his pain back at him, gently, honestly, unconsciously, he rejected it. Not because he didn't feel it, but because he wasn't ready to face it. Now in her absence, the mirror still remains. Not a physical one, but a psychic one, etched into his memory. A mirror that reflects not who she was, but who he failed to become in her presence. He sees her now in every woman who won't bend. He feels her in the quiet gaze of someone who has nothing to prove. And he aches not because she's gone, but because he was never truly there. The woman who no longer needs him becomes a myth in his mind, not because she was unreal, but because his reality was too shallow to hold her depth. She once offered him a gateway to his soul, and he mistook it for a detour. So now she becomes a symbol of what he abandoned within himself. The feminine in her was a force, not one that clung or pleaded, but one that waited for him to rise. And when he didn't, she didn't fall. She ascended. And the deeper truth? He didn't just lose her. He lost the version of himself that could have grown with her. Men who encounter awakened women often confuse them for tests, but they are mirrors, sacred ones, placed not to challenge, but to reveal. And when the masculine resists that revelation, when he chooses comfort over depth, defense over surrender, control over connection, he doesn't just push her away. He pushes away the path to his own becoming. The woman who walks away in calm power doesn't need to be remembered. She will be remembered, in silence, in shame, in late-night reflections that feel like reckoning, because she was never trying to change him. She was becoming herself, and he mistook that evolution as abandonment. The tragedy isn't that she left, it's that he stayed stagnant, that when she was growing wings, he was still digging trenches in his pride. This is the wound she leaves behind. Not one of cruelty, but of consequence. Not one of punishment, but of perspective. And in the haunting echo of her footsteps, he begins to understand that her walking away wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of his reckoning. Some men evolve from this. They turn inward. They do the work. They face the inner boy who felt unworthy of love. They break the ego that kept them from intimacy. They integrate. But others? They remain stuck in patterns, haunted not by what she did, but by what they refused to do. So if you leave, not in chaos but in clarity, if you walk with your head held high and your heart intact, you don't just exit his life. You become a milestone in his soul's timeline. A before her and after her moment. And in that way, he never really lets go, because he knows deep down that she wasn't just a woman, she was a turning point. And he missed it. There's a rare kind of woman whose absence becomes a man's awakening, not because she tried to save him, but because she refused to, because she loved him deeply, but not more than she loved her own soul. This is the woman who mastered detachment not through coldness, but through clarity. She didn't harden, she refined. She didn't shut down, she rose above. Her leaving was not a war cry, but a final whisper of truth, and that whisper echoes long after her presence is gone. He will wonder, why does she linger in his memory like a song he can't name? Why does her silence feel louder than the voices he now surrounds himself with? Because she didn't just walk away. She outgrew the space he never expanded. Carl Jung knew that the anima, the inner feminine, is often first encountered through projection. A man meets a woman who embodies his unlived feelings, his emotional shadow, his need for wholeness. And he worships her until she asks him to meet her there. But if he resists, if he refuses to integrate that energy within himself, He starts to resent her because she becomes the embodiment of everything he cannot hold. And when she finally leaves, she carries more than just her body. She carries his unspoken potential. She carries the emotional mirror he shattered. She carries the version of himself he's too afraid to become. And that's why he doesn't recover. He can replace her with noise, more bodies, more chaos, more distraction. But the silence she left behind cannot be filled with sound. It's the silence of what could have been, the silence of who he might have become, the silence of his unfinished evolution. You, the woman who walks away in sacred detachment, you don't need to prove anything. You already proved everything by loving without begging, by staying when it made sense and leaving when it cost your peace. He will remember the strength it took for you to not react. He'll remember the day you didn't reply, the night you didn't chase, the morning you didn't come back. And it will shatter the illusion that he held power over you. Because power is not control, it's awareness. And you became aware of your worth, aware of his emotional immaturity, aware of the cycle, and most of all, aware that it's not your job to rescue a man from himself. This awareness is what makes your absence unbearable. It's not just that he lost love, it's that he lost access to the woman who saw him before he even saw himself. And now he watches as you bloom beyond him, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because that was always your path. He just couldn't walk it with you. He may never admit it. His pride might wrap it in stories. He might say you were too much, too distant, too cold, too silent. But deep down, he knows you were too real. And that terrified him more than anything. Because he wasn't ready to face a woman who didn't need fixing. He wasn't ready to meet someone who asked him to feel, to grow, to stay. So now, every time he sees a woman who reminds him of you, his chest tightens. Because he remembers what it felt like to be held by someone who truly understood his soul and then lost it. He will wonder if he could have done more, if he could have softened sooner, if he could have chosen depth instead of distraction. But the time for could have has passed, because the woman who walks away in sacred silence doesn't walk in circles. She walks in lines, forward, with grace, with knowing. She doesn't turn around to see if he watches, because she knows he always will. Most women are taught that love means staying, that enduring pain in silence is noble, that sacrificing their needs is proof of devotion. But the woman who walks away without needing closure has entered the realm of the dark feminine, the archetype that dares to love herself more than the story that was breaking her. She doesn't beg, she doesn't plead, she doesn't fight to be seen anymore, because she finally sees herself. And that vision, clear, sovereign, uncompromising, is what haunts him most. It wasn't her departure that cut the deepest. It was the stillness with which she did it. No revenge, no explanation, no fireworks of emotion, just silence. Sacred, terrifying silence. In a world addicted to noise, to validation, to reaction, that silence is a scream that tells him she has entered a realm he can't follow, not because she barred the door, but because he never built the keys within himself. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this man, now spinning in regret, will call it fate. Fate that she slipped through his fingers. Fate that he wasn't ready. Fate that the timing was wrong. But what he doesn't understand is, timing doesn't run out. Willingness does. She was willing. Willing to open, willing to love, willing to wait, until she wasn't. And when she left, he felt a grief that wasn't just about her. It was about the version of himself that he buried to keep feeling safe. She mirrored his soul wound, yes, but she also mirrored his potential. The man he could have been, had he chosen healing over ego. And now her calm detachment becomes a myth to him. She becomes a figure both romantic and terrifying, the woman who held a mirror and asked nothing but truth. He may try to replace her with ease, with someone who won't ask the deep questions, with someone who won't challenge his shadows, with someone who won't walk away because they don't know how to. But it will never feel the same, because there is no substitute for depth, no stand-in for sovereignty, no replica for a woman who was whole before he touched her. And that wholeness, that's what unraveled him. He thought love meant dependency, that it required her to fall apart without him, that her strength would collapse if he left. But instead, she rose. And now he understands. The woman who doesn't need him was never his to lose. She was only his to meet. if he dared. So he replays it in his mind, the way she walked away, not in bitterness, but in reverence, not with accusations, but with understanding. And that understanding was his undoing, because she didn't blame him, she simply outgrew him. And there's nothing more haunting than knowing someone evolved without you. She now exists as a quiet echo in his psyche, not a ghost, but a flame he couldn't hold. She was a threshold, a teacher, a mirror, and he was too distracted by her reflection to see what it was asking him to become. So remember this, if you ever wonder whether he's forgotten, if your silence meant anything, if your leaving registered at all, know that he may never say it, he may never show it, but every woman who comes after you will meet a version of him that remembers. Because you were not just a chapter, you were the lesson. There is a power that belongs only to the woman who walks away with grace. Not rage, not resentment, but with a deep, sacred knowing that says, this is no longer where I bloom. And it's that power, the power of not needing to be chosen, that pierces the male psyche with haunting precision. She did not slam the door. She simply stopped waiting at it. She did not throw his words back at him. She just became too quiet for him to recognize the sound of his own echo anymore. This is the kind of silence that turns inward, the kind that signals not abandonment, but rebirth. To the masculine energy still bound to ego, this is shattering, because it challenges the illusion that she was orbiting him. The truth? She was never in orbit. She was a son of her own, and he mistook her warmth for dependence. When he realizes she needed nothing from him but presence, and even that he could not offer, he begins to awaken, slowly, painfully, into a different kind of aloneness. Not the aloneness of physical space, but the kind that grows in the soul when someone walks away and takes nothing with them. No emotion, no story, no unfinished sentence, only stillness. Carl Jung would recognize this as individuation in action, the sacred process of becoming one's true self, separate from the projections of others. The woman who walks away without needing to punish or explain has stepped fully into her individuation. She has stopped playing roles, rescuer, mother, fixer, fantasy. She is not his mirror anymore. She is not his anima projection anymore. She is no longer the dream he cast onto her skin. She is real, whole, complete. And in that completion, she becomes terrifying. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she did everything right. She didn't need him to crumble before leaving. She needed him to rise, and he didn't. So she gave him the only true gift left to offer: absence. You, if you are this woman, must understand what that means. It means you crossed a sacred threshold. You chose discomfort over illusion. You chose truth over fantasy. You chose self-possession over emotional performance. And the echoes of that choice will follow him through every silent moment he tries to distract himself from. He will hear your name in the pauses of new conversations. He will see your ghost in women who laugh but never reach his soul. He will feel the space where you once stood, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Because what haunts a man is not the one who screamed when she left. It's the one who said nothing. The one who smiled gently and vanished like mist. The one who stopped explaining and simply became untouchable. This is the dark feminine. Not cruel, not vengeful, but devastating in her refusal to collapse for love. She is not the storm. She is the calm after, the quiet you weren't prepared to live in. And while he may search for her again, trying to recreate the magic in safer, smaller ways, he will never quite find it. Because the kind of woman who knows how to walk away is also the kind of woman who never returns to the same fire she extinguished. She doesn't reignite what she's already learned from. She becomes the flame. And that flame will live on, not in his hands, but in the parts of him that finally began to feel after she stopped trying to make him feel anything at all. And so time begins to fold inward, the past returning not as a memory, but as a vibration, a cold breath that lingers in rooms he never expected to revisit. She haunts him, not like a ghost, but like a rhythm he can't unhear, a presence he can't name, yet feels beneath every quiet moment where no one challenges him to evolve. Because that's what she did, not with force, but with truth, not with words, but with presence. She called him into manhood by simply existing as a woman who no longer needed to be his project, his reflection, or his emotional home. And that absence, it stripped him of performance. There was no one left to impress, No one waiting for him to become anything but who he already was. And when a man is met with that, when a woman steps away and leaves no role for him to play, he's left alone with the rawness of himself. Carl Jung understood this ache. He wrote of the anima, the inner feminine of a man's psyche, and how she appears externally through women until he dares to meet her within. And so when she left, he wasn't just losing a woman. He was losing the image of himself he had projected into her. He wasn't mourning the relationship. He was mourning the version of himself she helped him glimpse, a version that terrified him more than he'd admit. This is the soul rupture that happens when a man meets a woman who demands nothing but presence and then leaves when it isn't given. She didn't ask him to fix himself. She didn't wait for him to wake up. She just chose herself, and in doing so, revealed the void he had always tried to mask with charm, dominance, or avoidance. Now, there is no distraction deep enough, no affection soft enough, no intimacy light enough to erase the imprint she left. Because she didn't mark him with possession, she marked him with absence. And absence is more permanent than presence when it is paired with power. The dark feminine doesn't scream to be seen, she disappears to be felt. And the man who once took her silence as indifference now understands it was the fiercest form of love. Not the love that smothers, the love that honors herself, honors him, enough to walk away when the sacred is not being held with reverence. You who have walked away with dignity must know this. You are unforgettable not because of what you gave, but because of what you stopped giving. You stopped feeding the illusion. You stopped shrinking for comfort. You stopped holding up a mirror for a man who refused to look. And in doing so, you became the mirror he now seeks in every silent moment. Not to reflect himself, but to finally see himself. Because a woman who knows her worth doesn't need to convince anyone to recognize it. She simply becomes too vast to be misunderstood, too grounded to be shaken, too quiet to be ignored. And that, more than anything, will be what he never recovers from. Eventually, he will try to rewrite the story, not with clarity, but with comfort. He'll tell himself she was too distant, too intense, too much of something he couldn't quite name. But beneath that narrative, beneath every rationalization, is the quiet knowing. She was the one who saw him, not the version he curated, not the mask he wore with pride, but the aching, raw, unformed man beneath it all. And she didn't flinch. She simply waited for him to meet himself. And when he didn't, she walked, not to punish, but to protect the woman she was becoming. This is what the dark feminine knows, that her energy is sacred currency. Not everyone is meant to hold it. Not everyone is ready to receive it. She doesn't stay where her soul must shrink. She doesn't love in hopes of being fixed. She loves fully, without attachment. And when it's time to go, she doesn't take pieces of him with her. She leaves him whole so he can see what he does with it. And that wholeness is heavy because it requires him to own his choices, to face the silence she left behind, not as punishment, but as a mirror. It is in that silence that the lessons breathe, the ones he wasn't ready for when she stood in front of him, the ones that echo now when no one is watching. In her absence, the world feels quieter, not in peace, but in question. He asks himself things he never dared to before. Why couldn't I meet her? What part of me was so afraid of her love? What would it have cost me to surrender to growth? And deeper still, what does it mean that she never looked back? Because she didn't. Not once. Not in memory. Not in message. She didn't return to check if he had changed. She trusted that if he ever did, it would no longer be for her. It would be for himself. That's the haunting part. She didn't leave a door cracked open. She didn't offer breadcrumbs of hope. She offered clarity, the sharp, sobering kind. And once she left, she became untouchable. Not because she disappeared, but because she had finally arrived in herself. Carl Jung taught that individuation is not about becoming someone else, but becoming who you already are, without compromise. This is what she did. She walked toward the woman she was always meant to be. And he will never forget the sound of her footsteps fading, not because they were loud, but because they were final. You too may feel the ache of walking away. You may doubt it in quiet hours. You may wonder if he ever truly saw you. If it mattered. If you were just another story he tells himself to feel in control. But know this, you were never forgettable. Because you were never performative. You were real. And real cannot be erased. It lingers, it echoes, it transforms, and it always returns. Not as a woman begging to be loved again, but as the reason he finally begins to love himself. This is your legacy, not the relationship, not the ending, but the impact. The dark feminine doesn't destroy, she awakens. And sometimes the awakening must happen after she's gone.